Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to meet you virtually via Get Hired 2020. All of you honor me with your presence. I'm delighted to be here for a few reasons. First and foremost, it is an opportunity for me to reconnect with IT professionals and engineers. I've been interested in studying the engineering culture for several years and creating leadership spaces for women engineers and IT professionals. My most recent work that focused on women engineers was published in Gender, Work, and Organizations in 2019. Hence, I'm happy to be back amongst you. Second, this keynote allows me to discuss what matters to me as a leadership scholar and the change I want to see globally. Let me begin by setting the context first. You're all here because you're thinking about your career, right? Maybe some of you are starting a new job. Perhaps some of you are transitioning to a new organizations. Hence, I'm sure as you think about your careers, you consider this big, bold question: what do we want to be? We all know that this question is a slight variation of the question that most of us grew up with, right? Which is, what do I want to be when I grow up? Inspired by the career talks in his school, even my 12-year-old son has also asked me the same question several times in the past few years. I would like you to reframe that question and instead ask yourself, who do I want to be? It is not what I want to be, but rather, who do I want to be? Take a few moments to make a mental or even a written note of what you thought when I asked you this question. Now that you've made a note of what you want to be, who do you want to be? I would like to provide you a background of who I am in terms of my research and how I arrived where I am today. I'm giving this background to you. I want to present the narrative, my own narrative, to help you write yours, and maybe also to pique your interest in rewriting your understanding and practice of leadership. So please bear with me. I will soon return to the initial question that I proposed just a short while ago. However, before I move further, I have some additional questions for you. Number one, when you think of leadership, what comes to your mind? Number two, when you think of leaders, who comes to your mind and why? Now take a moment again to write what and who comes to your mind. I suppose you've already started thinking about who I am and who's a leader. Keep these thoughts with you until we return to them at the end of this keynote. Meanwhile, I want to share Aisha's story with you. Her story describes one particular leader that she had in her own organization. Aisha worked as a junior IT executive in a Fortune 100 company. She had worked endless hours to establish herself professionally in this organization for the past 8 years. In March 2019, Aisha lost her older sister, very tragically. Aisha was utterly devastated. When she returned to work, her boss, John, called her into his office. First words out of his mouth, "I know that you're grieving, but I don't want this to impact your productivity at work." Aisha found John's words inhumane and heartless. She lost all respect for him. Aisha's story is not unique. We know that American corporate culture is predominantly individualistic and productivity-driven. I want you to take a moment to reflect on John as a leader in this story. Why did he react this way? If you were in Aisha's shoes, how would you respond? And if you were John, how would you respond to Aisha's grief? Let's now move to my research narrative to provide a framework to inform the many questions that I've posed for you. I started my academic career as a cross-cultural expert. I've been interested in studying globalization and its impact on individuals, organizations, and societies. Earlier in my career, I focused on emerging economies, multinationals' roles in knowledge transfer, and transitioning cultural values. The more I researched, the more complex and messy the idea of cultural shifts became for me. I realized that I could not be satisfied by a reductionist approach to solving societal problems. I believe that human problems are complex and multidimensional. Social and organizational problems also tend to evolve. Yet, at another level, I started becoming aware of the growing levels of inequalities around the world. This recognition troubled me. In my research, I looked to the leading economists, such as Branko Milanovic and Joseph Stiglitz. They both argued that globalization's current phase might not be the only reason for this widening gap. Still, it is one of the significant reasons. Let me give you some recent examples of inequalities worldwide. In China, the government struggles to spread wealth more evenly. Brazil's Sao Paulo is 4 times richer than its poorest city. Income inequality in the United States has been multiplying for the past 30 years. Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality reports that recent decades in the United States have seen an increase in the difference between CEO compensation and that of an average worker. CEOs in 1965 made 24 times more than the average production worker, whereas in 2009, they made 185 times more. Globally, inequality is much worse than we can imagine. 1% of the world's population has more wealth than the world's 99% combined. Such inequality has framed the 1% versus the 99% narrative. The world's 4 billion people at the bottom of the pyramid predominantly constitute an invisible and forgotten community. According to inequality.org, based on the latest figures released between 2006 and 2018, only 19% of the global wealth went to 90% of the world's population. In other words, a total of 32,000 rich people took away the same amount of wealth as the bottom 90% of the population. That is a total of 288 million people. Milanovic also refers to the elephant curve as you see in this slide. As one maps global income growth, there's a pattern to be found here. We see the world's poorest shut out of the growth. As I mentioned previously, we can also see a declining middle class in developed countries, which has generated a divisive socio-political environment, particularly since 2016. I searched for answers in leadership and organizational literatures, and instead found organizations and leaders to perpetuate the same inequalities that concern me. I want to highlight the leadership crisis here. Let me explain. Exemplary leaders are very rare around the world. In recent decades, we've witnessed a litany of scandals globally. Even amidst an unprecedented global pandemic, we see examples of self-serving corporate and political leaders, soaring revenues and profits on one hand for some tech giants. However, they're laying off and failing to protect their workers on the other hand. A recent study that assessed how organizations have responded to the pandemic and movement for social justice, it concludes that many organizations have failed to deliver shifts in their purpose at a time when enlightened purpose should be of paramount importance. Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been looking at the public confidence with corporate and political leaders for the past 20 years, has persistently shown increasing dissatisfaction with the leaders globally. Their 2020 report indicates that a growing sense of inequity undermines our trust in our institutions and leaders, as depicted in this chart. People all over the world find their institutions and leaders incompetent and unethical. Capitalism, in its current form, is doing more harm than good in the world, the global audience has reported in their 2020 survey. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. For me, it really sums up the importance of leadership and the rising levels of inequalities, and the growing need to connect the two issues. As a result, over the past several years, I've become fixated on fixing both. I've joined a small but growing number of scholars to challenge the conventional ways in which we think about leadership and develop our leaders. I would argue that current leadership practice is flawed, in that it creates a disconnect between leaders and the stakeholders they serve. This disconnect has led to the dehumanization of leadership. Conventional approaches to leadership single-mindedly view leadership as a goal-focused activity. These approaches overlook the importance of identity and the context, thereby creating a global leadership crisis where the examples of a vast majority of irresponsible leaders and widespread dissatisfaction with the leaders is found globally. The search for finding a solution to this problem has taken me to new disciplines. What I present today is where I am here today. Like some other leadership scholars, I believe that we need to reconceptualize leadership to develop a new generation of humanistic leaders. Next, let me explain what is humanistic and what humanistic leadership means. It is essential to distinguish between the dominant paradigm that is used within contemporary organization and an alternative one. We refer to the dominant paradigm as the economistic paradigm, which you see on your left. And an alternative way of thinking or new way of thinking, which I would refer to as the humanistic mode or humanistic paradigm. Let's look at the two paradigms side by side as shown in this figure. Here we see four basic drives that guide all human actions, right? And all human decisions, starting with DA, or the drive to acquire resources, wealth, and status. DD, which is the drive to defend against threats and competition. DB, which is the drive to bond, to form long-term relationships. And DC, the drive to comprehend, to experience engagement and intellectual curiosity. These four drives are strongly independent. They're also frequently in a state of conflict. Hence, we need to balance the four drives in our daily lives continuously. Let's imagine two leaders here. The first leader only focuses on the drive to acquire money and ignores all other drives, much like John in Aisha's story. Such a leader ends up creating a toxic environment. A second leader who develops bonds with followers, shows empathy, empowers, they create a positively inspiring environment. Needless to add, a majority of us would like to work with a leader who cares and builds a strong team. Let's first focus on the left, which is an economistic paradigm. At its baseline, if you see, it presumes human wants are unlimited and we as human beings live to satisfy these insatiable wants. In this model, we also notice that the desire to acquire is more consuming, it's much bigger than any other drive. The emphasis in this paradigm is on the maximization of wealth, power, and status. As a result of this economistic paradigm, we have infiltrated leadership development approaches that over-rely on narrow sets of assumptions and focus on developing leaders who possess just the right skills and just the right competencies to lead effectively. Let's go back to John in Aisha's story. He has made it clear that he values productivity. One may argue that he possesses the right skills to lead effectively. But what has he lost? Would he be able to motivate Aisha? Would he be able to create an inclusive culture and inspire others? Because of an emphasis on functional leadership, it is no surprise that we find leaders whose actions and values reflect a lack of concern for people, for society, and even a positive attitude towards greed. In my recent blog post, I refer to this as being stuck within a vicious circle of self serving, inauthentic leaders, cultures, and values. Pearson, in his book entitled Humanistic Management, highlights the downside of an economistic paradigm. He argues that humans don't only have needs related to material wealth. We are fundamentally social, emotionally driven, and require moral, ethical standards to guide our actions. He argues that when humans can build capabilities to develop themselves and their communities to achieve higher levels of well being, they create conditions of flourishing for all humankind, not only for themselves, but for all humankind. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen also centralizes human dignity and human well being. These practices promote stakeholder engagement and emphasize shared responsibility and shared benefits within organizations. These ideas are the bedrock of a humanistic paradigm, which you see on the left in this slide. Now let's return and focus on the humanistic paradigm, which, as I said earlier, is on the right. At its baseline, humanistic paradigm presumes the four drives balance to provide basic human dignity. However, to allow human flourishing and fulfillment to occur, we need to balance the four drives above the basic dignity threshold. The development of these capabilities requires constant learning to allow for higher levels of flourishing, higher levels of well-being, and humanistic leaders are able to create a climate in which people emotionally embrace the organization's purpose, that is their drive to comprehend. They're able to maintain a very positive long-term relationships with each other, that is their drive to bond. They create financial value, that is their drive to acquire. And they count on their collective strength to weather the storm of competition, that is the drive to defend. Steve Jobs got this message right to a certain extent. His biographer, Walter Isaacson, said Jobs puts products before profits. At his first retreat with the Macintosh team, Jobs began by writing a maxim on his whiteboard. It read, "Don't compromise." Jobs retained his intense focus on making the products great throughout his career, and the profits mostly followed. Jobs also incorporated one critical principle in his leadership, empathy, that according to many people made him amongst the most renowned innovators in human history. At the core was Jobs' belief, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. He said to Stanford's graduating class in 2006, and he said, everything else is secondary. As you can see, the idea of balancing the four drives to acquire, bond, defend, and comprehend is essential in humanistic leadership as a freedom and the idea of well-being that serve as the ultimate objective. This paradigm's operating logic promotes constant learning. Bill Gates presents a great example of some of these themes as well. He has evolved from someone who founded Microsoft to the world's most recognized philanthropist. He has learned to help others by giving back and showing that he cares for the global community, to educate and to fight poverty, just as some examples. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has donated billions of dollars to causes all over the world. Their commitment to giving back illustrates their focus on social responsibility. It also shows that pursuit of solutions and making life better goes beyond just making a profit. Instead, through their work, Bill and Melinda, both of them demonstrate that they care about bringing a significant change in the world that would make a difference for those who need it the most. Bill Gates' legend status has now become much more than what he has accomplished as a business level than at the social level. Gates noted, as we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. He has done precisely the same in his mission. I believe that the humanistic model is highly relevant to addressing some of the global crises we face today. Let's take a look at the world around us: the quest for racial justice, inclusion, growing disconnects between communities, rising inequalities, and COVID-19. We have a choice to make. Is it going to be business as usual or another way, which we can frame in the given context as our humanly struggles to foster broader flourishing, promotion of individual dignity, well-being, ethics of care, and concern for the common good? These are all essential to humanizing leadership. While the humanistic framework highlights human nature's positive potential, it also recognizes human behavior's complexity by emphasizing the need to constantly balance these independent drives. With that, I would like to add a caution here. Humanistic leadership is not easy and reductionist. It may sound as such. As a leader, you always need to balance these four drives to protect human dignity and promote well-being. From this perspective, humanistic leadership is a journey and not a destination. By following this path, we're in the process of becoming who we aspire to become. As I wrap up this keynote, I realize that this may be a mouthful for some of you. It may confuse some others, and hopefully it intrigues many of you. Hence this question, where does it leave us, right? Well, now I want to return to the question I posed earlier, beginning with, when you think of leadership, what do you think of? Or when you think of leaders, who comes to your mind and why? I hope you reframe your responses to think about leaders who act in ways that honor human beings, uphold their dignity, and foster a sense of responsibility. I also hope that when you lead others and yourself, you lead with precisely the same principles. We're leaders in our own right, and even if we don't have any authority in the organizational sense, because we live in a relational whole, we all exercise some level of influence. To further highlight leadership's importance, I want to use Steve Jobs' quote that he shared in a rare reflective moment. He said, "It is in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. It is technology married with liberal arts, with humanities and social sciences that yields us the results that make our hearts sing." I would expand this quote further to argue that technology and innovation are matters of the mind, but also matters of the heart. We can learn to use our heart to manage our mind or our reason. Note that a non-technology environment or framework is most helpful in thinking about technology. And humanistic leadership will help you build great products and also great teams. Always think and act with responsibility. Now that brings us to the question I asked first, who do I want to be? I would let you explore that question on your own to write your own personal narrative. Consider not what you want to be, but who you want to be as you think about your career. Be bold in exploring this question, like Alan Turing, the pioneer of artificial intelligence, aimed to be. I promise that this question will enable you to think freely, but act with care and compassion. It will help you lead with a great sense of responsibility towards 7.8 billion people that live on this planet with us. Let this question take you on a journey that leaves you personally as well as professionally fulfilled. I want to conclude with Bill Gates' inspirational words that he wrote to the Harvard community members. He said, "I hope you will reflect on what you've done with your talent and energy. I hope you will judge yourselves not on your professional accomplishments alone. It is also on how well you work to address the world's most profound inequities and how well you treat people. People who are a world away and have nothing in common with you but their humanity. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. You will find me on Medium, blogging, and also on LinkedIn. You can search under my name. If this keynote and the ideas herein piqued your interest, please check out my website, which is www.humanizinginitiative.com. Feel free to share your thoughts. I wish you all the very best in your career and in your quest for who you want to be. Thank you.